Thank you all for coming out tonight or for joining us via the internet. We're here tonight with John Bemelmans Marciano, who brings us the newest Madeline story, Madeline and the Old House in Paris, as well as the 9 lives of Alexander Badenfield. I want to personally thank the Miami Children's Museum for sponsoring this event. It's our first collaboration with them, and we're very excited to have them here as well. But let's cut right to the chase. I present to you John Bemelmans Marciano.
Hey everybody! Thanks for coming out to see me, or tuning in, or however you come to see it. Let me start off telling you a little bit. Actually, let me start off by saying that the most embarrassing thing that happens to me is when I'm doing a bookstore signing, and someone comes up to me and starts talking in French. You know, bonjour, and I just have no idea what they're saying, and then I have to explain that my grandfather was not French, and my mother was not French, and I am not French, so I don't even understand French. So let me start there, so nobody asks me that. My grandfather was European. He was born in the Tyrol, which is now in northern Italy, but was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was Flemish. His mother was German, so he was just a mutt of Europe. He was many things, but he was not French. When he was about 13 or 14 years old, he moved to America. And about 20 years later, he had my mom. And he had the idea for a book, something about a girl with red or copper reddish hair who did everything in 2 straight lines. And when he took my mom, when she was 2.5 years old, he took my mom on a trip to Paris. And there's an amazing scrapbook that he made for her of this adventure. And she's dressed exactly. She's got the little blue coat. She has the straw hat. And there's a picture of her in front of the Eiffel Tower. There's a picture of her at the zoo where Madeline was made. You can almost kind of see everything gelling together. And then you turn to the second part of the trip. He went to a place called the Ile Dieu, which means the Isle of God. And I think it's in the Atlantic Ocean. It's off the coast of France. And it was this tiny island that at the time only had 1 motorized vehicle. So he got around the island on a little red bicycle, which was hit by the only motorized vehicle, which luckily was the ambulance. And it took him to the hospital. I think he had broken his arm. And he was looking up at the ceiling, and there was a crack that looked like a rabbit, or had the habit of looking like a rabbit, I guess. And he had, and then the girl in the room next door came in and hopped on his bed and lifted up her shirt and showed the scar from the appendix operation she had just had. So he went home to New York. They were living in New York. And he went to his favorite place, which was Pete's Tavern, which is still there. And on the back of the menu, he started in an old house in Paris that was covered with vines, lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. I'd like to say that the rest is history, but it wasn't quite that simple. To go a little bit further back, my grandfather wanted to be a comic strip artist. He had a comic strip in the 1920s that was a dismal failure. Someone told him that he would never he would never be successful at it until he because he was an American, until he had an American child. So he quit his job, his very good paying job at the Hotel Ritz in 1929, which was not a good time to quit and become an artist. So he lived in really pretty abject artist poverty for a while. And in 1933, I believe, he lived in the 6th floor walk-up in Greenwich Village, and it was a very depressing place. And to make it a little bit less depressing, he drew pictures on his window shades of the Tyrol, which is where he was born. It's alpine landscape, and it just made him feel better to have these mountain scenes up. And one of the other people who lived in the building knew a woman named Mae Massey, who had begun at Viking, a children's literature division imprint, Ferdinand the Bull, and she came to see his drawings and said, "Have you ever thought of doing a children's book?" And he asked, "Well, how much does it pay?" And she said, $500. And he said, yes. So he did a book about life in the Alps called Hansi, And then he did a few more books and had some. But when he came up with the idea for Madeline, he kind of combined the ideas that he had for doing a comic strip with children's literature. So if you look at that first Madeline, it kind of looks like a lot of kids' books today, but at the time, there is so little text in it. I mean, there's Miss Clavel ran fast and faster. And it's 3 pages, and it is literally, it's just a comic strip blown up, and it was unusual. And his editor, who had been the one who had discovered him and got him to do children's books, said, "This is way too cartoonish. It's beneath you. I'm not going to publish it." So he actually took it somewhere else, and that was just one of those editorial mistakes. So, so my grandfather did that Madeline book, and he did about 5 others. And when I was now my own mom, I did not grow up. My mom grew up in this amazing milieu of. I mean, she tells stories about being in Cuba before Castro and having dinner with. When she was 8 years old, she was living in Los Angeles during World War II, and Dorothy Parker. She actually made a cocktail for Dorothy Parker, who thought it was the cutest thing in the world that an 8-year-old knew how to make a cocktail. But she was never so into this moving around or anything else. And she bought with my father a horse farm, which is not as glamorous as it sounds. I mean, it was just a working farm in what was then the farmland, New Jersey, in the middle of nowhere. And we never went to New York. We got up at night. We had to do more work. And we just kind of had the kitchen table. And she would tell me these stories about hanging out with Errol Flynn. And I would just say, "Well, Mom, what happened exactly? Like, why are we here?" But I'm also glad. I'm also, of course, glad for all of that. When I was growing up, I actually, in some ways, like my grandfather, I loved comic strips. I loved Peanuts and all of that. But I loved superheroes. I loved comic books, and I learned how to draw from copying The Flash, Hawkman, Superman, Batman, all of that stuff. And all I wanted to do was just write and draw comic books. And then I went to college, and then I wanted to be, a painter with, just do just great big canvases, and I wanted to write novels and all the rest of it. And I worked for, then reality set in, started doing jobs like I worked for small town newspaper. I did some multimedia jobs, and I slowly came to read my grandfather's adult work. He actually, in his lifetime, as much as he was known for Madeline, he was known for his book for adults. He wrote novels, he wrote screenplays, he wrote especially nonfiction books. His nonfiction books were hugely popular. And now, my grandfather passed away before I ever knew him, but my grandmother was like a third parent to me, and her house was filled with all of his stuff. And when I say all of his stuff, I mean sketches, photographs, old manuscripts, and stuff that hadn't been touched. And so when I was at her house one day, I just started looking through all this stuff and thought, like, all this amazing material. And I had this idea to do a book about my grandfather. While I was doing that, I actually found manuscripts for books that he had written but never illustrated. And so my first book was actually a book about, it was a book that he had written and I illustrated, thinking somehow, like you do in your 20s, that this is so easy. And I did that book, and then I started to do my own books, and I actually felt like I really needed to become a better illustrator and learn the business. And that's brought me to do my newest book, which is Madeline, the Old House in Paris. And it's the third full-on Madeline book that I've done. The first one was set in Rome, Madeline, the Cats of Rome. Second one is Madeline at the White House. And the reason that I did those two books first was there's something about the original Madeline book that if you go to Paris and you look at it, it still looks the same. How it captured not just the city so perfectly. I mean, he captured the way the people look. I mean, you look at the flower seller in the book, you look at the guy walking down the street, and it's just still that. It's the nose, it's the face, it's the whole thing. And even though my grandfather drew so simply, he really was able to capture the character, the colors, and all of that. And I felt when I started to start doing Madeline books, I really didn't want to do, I don't know, I didn't feel like I could really do justice to it. Even though he hadn't lived in Paris, he loved the city and he knew it so well. So I had lived in Rome for a couple of years. The other half of my family is Italian. And I felt this connection to that place. And I was able to do the colors and sort of have every detail right. The idea was that yeah, I don't know. Whatever. I'm American. It's the White House. It's Washington, D.C. I went on school trips there. It's one of those things that just kind of is in your fiber. And anyway, after I did those 2 books, I decided that I wanted to do something I finally wanted to tackle Paris. So that was this book. I spent a couple of weeks in Paris. I mean, I'd been there many other times before, but just scouting all these different locations. In addition to doing Madeline books, I also do I've done nonfiction books for adults. I've done a couple of word books. I'm doing a book now. It's been in the works for a number of years. It's called Whatever Happened to the Metric System. And it's a big 300-page book that is about the history of the metric system, which was created during the French Revolution. And I spent about a year reading about the French Academy of Sciences and these geniuses who came up with it. And the metric system was started during the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution. And science, even though that was when the metric system sort of blew up, it was also when scientists were considered, there was something that was said, we have no more need of scientists. And the most famous, greatest scientist was Antoine Lavoisier, who basically created the discipline of chemistry. And he also was the main guy creating the metric system. And he got guillotined. And I thought, what an amazing sort of thing to have. I don't know, I just love the idea. I spent a year studying this, and I thought, I just love these old costumes. I love all of this stuff, the telescopes, the measuring equipment, and I just wanted to draw it. So I had the idea of, you like the idea of the guillotine? Or not?
I can't get it out of my head. I can't get it.
Well, he got guillotined. So, well, let me tell you something, because I brought this up to my editor, and she goes, you are not having a character in a book who got guillotined. And she said, there's just no way that's happening. So I thought, well, I can kind of cover it up. And I thought, okay. And I was like really going to be stubborn about it. And I was going to say, all right, I'm going to put I'm not going to say that that's how he died, but I'm going to put a handkerchief around him. I'm going to have one picture where you can kind of see his head coming off. But then I thought, okay, well, can I come up with a better way of doing it? So all of these guys who are creating the metric system, these great guys, were all astronomers. So what I did was I had him be, well, I'm going to read the book in a little bit, but a little just sneak thing. So I have him be, well, I shouldn't really give it away. Maybe I'll just read it at this point. Should I do that? All right, I'll read it at this point. So this is Madeline and the Old House in Paris, which actually I think is probably the first book ever inspired by the introduction of the metric system. In an old house in Paris that was covered with vines lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. In another old house that stood next door lived the son of the Spanish ambassador. One afternoon at 5:15, a long black car pulled into the drive. Wondering who it could possibly be, Pepito and Madeline ran to see. It was Lord Cuckooface, the sometimes cruel and always nosy head of school. He had come to make a surprise inspection. Nothing escaped his skills of detection, save a certain little mouse who also occupied the house. You can't be too careful with these old houses, full as they are of termites and louses, for a thoroughly unfamiliar door, and asked Miss Clavel what it was for. Dear sir, it leads up to the attic, said Miss Clavel, her voice emphatic. A room that I believe is haunted. Rubbish, the Lord said, and completely undaunted, climbed to an attic that was hot and musty and filled with old chests that were really quite dusty. There are spiders, you see, but nary a ghost. But what's this? He said. Why, this is the most splendid telescope I've ever the pleasure of coming across. Oh, what a treasure. So here's where I put in all of the boring stuff that no one in the world cares about. This is all 18th century astronomical equipment. This is called an orrery. Anyway, Cuckoo Face rubbed his hands greedily and made off with it speedily. After that, the girls broke their bread and brushed their teeth and went to bed. In the middle of the night, Madeline said, "Something is not right." She heard the sound of someone moaning, almost like a ghost was groaning. The girls all cried, "Look, a ghoul!" But Madeline was not a fool. "That's no goblin," she said. "It's only a brat." But the moans went on. In fact, they got Pito could laugh any longer. Madeline went off investigating, while the others, afraid, were hesitating. They crept up the stairs. Was it a mouse, a bat, or something much scarier than any of that? It was a ghost! He cried, "Woo! Woo!" The girls and Pepito cried, "Boo-hoo!" I'm sorry, but Madeline just said, "Pooh, pooh." The ghost broke down and started crying. "Oh, this is even worse than dying." Madeline offered him a tears fell right on through. "Monsieur Ghost, please tell us too what it is that's troubling you." "My name is Felix de la Morte, and I was born the scientific sort." You probably can't see, he's actually looking at the stars through his bottle. "And I was born the scientific sort. Already by the age of 7, I had mastered the study of the stars in heaven. Proud I was and very glad to be the first boy admitted to the academy. Now comes the woeful part of my story. It's a comet that only nears the Earth every 221 years. Just as my comet moved into view, I leapt for joy. What is sad but true is that I forgot I was sitting on a roof." And you can see his chair's falling, his wig's falling, and there are just his legs sticking out of the bush. "I have haunted this house for years without cease, awaiting the comet so I may rest in peace. Tomorrow night it finally returns, you see, but alas, my telescope has been stolen from me." Madeline said, "How unfair, how unjust. We will get it back for you, we must." Using a wig, these clothes, and even this dust. Began the very next night, when Miss Clavel turned out the light. Madeline said, "The coast is clear," and gave Pepito the sign to near. The girls held a mirror steady, while the rest helped get the costumes ready. They used a jacket and a scarf of lace and a piled-up wig and powdered face, plus a pair of breeches colored blue and a buckled high-heeled shoe or two. They biked to a boat that was waiting below and rowed their way to this chateau. "Awake, awake, Lord Cuckoo Face, and save yourself from foul disgrace. You've crossed a line that's awfully fine by taking what is rightly mine. This telescope that now I lack, I order you to give it back." Poor Cuckoo Face, his jaw gone slack and halfway to a heart attack, cried, Have mercy on a poor old fool. I was only borrowing it from the school. And leave me be." The children seized their prize and then rowed their way home up. Felix was waiting, anxious and glum. Wouldn't the children ever come? The door swung open to reveal to his joy the safe return of his best-loved toy. Felix thanked them with all his heart, and now begins our final part. While the rest of the world was soundly sleeping, a girl and a boy and a ghost were peeping at a rare and brilliant sight, a comet streaking through the night. So what do you think? Do you think it would have been better if he had been guillotined, or do you like the? I mean, do you think it's better with him falling off? I was like feedback. Choose your own fate. Okay, good. I think it's probably, I don't know. I really like, I have to say, I like ghosts. I like, actually, my new book is about a boy. It's called The 9 Lives of Alexander Badenfield. It's about a boy who dies 9 times. So it seems to be just kind of what I'm doing right now. But are there any, I mean, does anybody have any questions? Should I just talk about some other stuff? No? No questions? All right. I'm sorry? What life am I on? I think it's still number 1. I hope. Yeah.
Why did you decide to write this book? Like, what inspired you? What motivated? Is it something that you knew because of the fact that your family, left this legacy?
Well, doing the original one, I don't. It wasn't something to do at first. It was finding this, finding these manuscripts that he had left were a really inspiring thing to have, and then it became sort of a heavier thing to live up to. And I think it was really only when I first was doing it, I was really trying to make it very much my own. And then when these last 3 books that I've written and illustrated completely myself, I really just sort of let it be a continuation of the original character and haven't really, where I think I bring my own stuff to it. I mean, obviously the style is a little bit different. And, one thing that's funny is in the original books, there's just so much stuff, and books were 64 pages long, picture books. Now trying to get more than 32 pages is hard. The rhymes were never, the first book I did, I tried to copy. My grandfather did these rhymes that weren't quite right. He would, for instance, rhyme Genevieve, which is the name of Madeline's dog, with leaf, Genevieve and leaf, which just doesn't rhyme in English, but in German it would be Genevieve and leaf. And I can only imagine his editor saying, that doesn't rhyme. And he would also do things, now and my friends who are illustrators will always complain about it, is the art director, the kid has to be wearing the same thing in every picture, and there's all this consistency stuff. And if you look at the original Madeline book, Madeline's hairstyle is different in every single picture. And what I love about it is the thing that's amazing about my grandfather's books is that each one is just completely different. And you can tell he was really doing it in the moment. You can tell he was not looking at what he had done before. So there's really a freshness to that, which is cool. And so the stuff that I do has to be almost recreating something that never was. It's more, the original Madeline book was, I think, 48 pages, only 8 pictures were in color. And people who grew up reading it imagine this like lushly colorful world. And they imagine something different than actually was. So I feel like my job is actually to try to recreate the Madeline that people remember from their childhood more than anything else. And I think is really, it's a hard thing to sort of understand when you're doing like my books, nonfiction books for adults, or even chapter books, or a book like this, which is for middle grade. Your reader, it's a one-way dialogue. And what's different about a picture book is there's a third person involved. There's the parent or the teacher who's reading and also brings their own take to it. And you actually for the parent or the teacher to bring their own stuff to it. So if you have anything in the text, it's not great. You want to throw things. I always try to throw something into the pictures that doesn't have to really necessarily do with the text, or you don't want to overwrite them. It's fine to overdraw them. You don't want to overwrite them. And so I think it's just, so I come into, after having done it now for 15 years, I kind of know it better. And there's just, there's a sort of a different sensibility that I bring than my grandfather did. No? So let's see, maybe I'll just finish up with just talking a little bit about where I should take Madeline next, which is always kind of the big thing. My grandfather once paid 2 kids $5 if they could come up with an idea. And the idea they came is that Madeline has a dog, and she saves Madeline for drowning, which was a sequel he did, I think, about 14 years after the original. And it was it won the Caldecott, so it was so I figured that was a good thing. So when I go into schools now, and I ask the kids, so where should Madeline go next? And it's always either their hometown, so it's Moon or on the Titanic, or something else like that. Meeting leprechauns. My favorite one is she's actually climbing the mountain in New Hampshire. She falls into a hole and is stuck with a monkey doing the cha-cha. And anyway, I just I think that it's the hardest thing is just doing a sequel and trying to keep it fresh and original. And I think whether it's kids wanting like a leprechaun doing the cha-cha on the moon, or it's a guy who gets guillotined or falls off, it's just my job is to just come up with something that's just not exactly what you think it's going to be. So anyway, thank you wherever you are for listening to me.
Thank you, guys. John's books are for sale at the register. If you're joining us online, you can call the phone number below and request a signed copy. There's free shipping for a couple more minutes, so jump on that. Otherwise, John will be signing here. Thanks again to the Miami Children's Museum for sponsoring tonight, and thank you, John.